My name is Orlando Madrid. I'm a jazz saxophonist, composer, and educator, and this is the Charlie Parker Journey, Part 2. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is amazing to see people really checking out Bird and the legacy that he left. In the first video, we talked about his early life. We also talked about how he was considered one of the greatest musicians of all time and left a legacy by helping to create a new musical movement entitled bebop. We also had some amazing interview content from some amazing people. We also talked about how he left us and passed away, which was very unfortunate because he was very young. But the legacy that he left was just unbelievable. Still to this day, just can't believe it. Every time I listen to him, it's just, I learned so much. He was way ahead of his time. In part 2, we're gonna go in depth about talking about Charlie Parker as an improviser and what made him stand out as being coined as one of the greatest improvisers of all time. We're also going to talk about American songbook standards and how they evolved and made their way into the bebop era in a compositional standpoint. I'm also going to shed some light on what a contrafact is and how important they are, especially if you're trying to write your own music. And we're going to end with a lot more interview content that just highlight the life and genius of Charlie Parker. And I'm also going to go in depth in one of Charlie Parker's licks that has been super helpful throughout my career, and I know it will with you guys as well. And that's about it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Part 2, the Charlie Parker Journey. All right, let's get into it.
The Georgie Jessel Jazz. So, Charlie, I want to award you now the Downbeat Award for the best alto sax man of 1951. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And Diz, this is to you from Downbeat for being one of the top trumpet men of all time. Congratulations, Diz. I mean Dizzy, I got a little informal there. You boys got anything more to say?
Well, Earl, they say music speaks louder than words, so we'd rather voice our opinion that way, if you don't mind.
I think that'd be all right with everybody if you really want to do it.
Good.
Okay, now while you fellows are getting us up there.
That right there was Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie accepting awards from the great Downbeat magazine. Charlie Parker is one of the best alto saxmen, and Dizzy Gillespie is one of the greatest trumpet players of all time. So well deserved. I mean, did you hear Charlie Parker? He's crazy. Like, the double time licks that he was playing, Up until this point, nobody on the saxophone was playing that way. Double time licks, meaning that licks that are sped up almost. It's like if you take a tape and you fast forward it, but he was doing it in real time. Ridiculous. Like, he was insane. He was a freaking mad scientist. He played in a way that people cannot even capture today. He did it in such a short time as well. Like, not even just his amazing technique and his really beautiful tone, but in the way that he phrased alone. He phrased on such a high level. It was on such a high level of intelligence, people. Like, unreal. Complete mastery.
June 5th, 1945, first time Coltrane sees Charlie Parker. Blows his mind. What kind of person is he? This brother got so much creativity in him. Willing to cut against the grain, courageous to the core. You can just see Coltrane, his mind was blown.
John and I were screaming. It's the wonder we didn't fall over the balcony. We had never heard anything like that in our life. We never heard double time. It's impossible.
The first time I heard Charlie Parker, I knew that was the thing for me. Charlie Parker did all the things I would like to do and more. He really had a genius.
He's still with Charlie Parker.
Things to say, like Charlie Parker had been clocked at 360 notes per minute when the average, or everybody else was supposed to be doing 170. So that made bebop especially significant because he was that's right, the front runner. And I was supposed to be a stand-in for the most recently departed Charlie Parker. I want to tell you, 300 and some notes a minute. I don't even know. I don't think anybody ever clocked it, really. But it was a pretty slick thing to say. You always say things like that around people who don't understand.
When we heard Charlie Parker in person, oh, man, well, you wanted to be like him, play like him. You know, Dizzy and Charlie Parker, they just revolutionized music to that time.
So he'd walk in cold and hear what they were doing, and he would just join right in as if he'd been playing with them for weeks. When they would modulate or change keys, he heard for a minute where they were going, and then his instinct and his great ears would take him to the right place. It was amazing. I've seen him and heard him do that many times in different situations. This particular situation was great because it was a big band, and it's a little harder to do it with a big band, playing in between the lines, than it would be with a small band where the pianist can just take you to where you have to go if you don't know where you're going. Well, for example, in the arrangements there are spaces. If there's no comping and he doesn't know it, he doesn't know where it's going. But in a small band, if it's new to him and he hasn't played it before and he doesn't know where it's going, the piano player can always give you some accompaniment to take you to where you're going. And someone with his great ears and instinct had no problem. It was always amazing to me to see how he overcame all of these little difficulties. My 3 years with his quintet were like going to graduate school. I stood next to this colossal giant every night and listened to the outpourings of true, raw genius. No matter what type of situation we were in, he came through with a home run every time.
So we just heard from a bunch of jazz musicians that are true masters. Benny Golson, John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Jimmy Heath, also someone that even played with Bird, Rodney. How incredible must that have been, to play with Charlie Parker? He mentioned it was like going to graduate school. I can only imagine how amazing that would be. I feel like most of us will spend our entire lives chasing Bird and trying to emulate him and imitate him as best as we can. He was way before his time, and those interviews are all testament to how great he was and how he really was one of the greatest improvisers and musicians of all time. In modern day today, we have lots of really killing saxophonists. I feel like there's one in particular, though, that is really stretching the envelope. Today he's doing probably everything that Bird would have done if he was still alive. I feel like he's the Bird of our era, and we're going to hear from him here on The Great Charlie Parker. Here's Chris Potter.
Chris, I want to start off with reading a quote and just getting what you think. Master your instrument, master the music, then forget all about it and just play. Charlie Parker. What do you think of that quote?
Good advice. I mean, if you judge by the results, Charlie Parker, yeah. Listen to what he said. Yeah, I mean, I think there is, there's a lot to that it just takes a lot of work to get the vocabulary together, to figure out what, how you want to express what it is you have in mind to express. It's just an incredible amount of work. And then when you're actually playing, if you're thinking about that at all, then you're taking away from the expressive aspect, which is the whole thing. So yeah, so you kind of have to, it's almost like you have to overlearn, you have to learn 5 times as much as you might use in that particular context, so that you'll know where to go, and if you do need to draw on some of it, then you've got it. And then it's having the taste to not use it all, to know what it is you want to do and only do that.
The commercialization of swing made it impossible for any musical evolution, and its mass market capitalism meant that jazz was stuck in big bands, soggy rhythms, arrangers, vertical harmonies, and non-playing orchestra leaders. Musicians wanted to move on. There was limited creative freedom in the business that had become swing. Many musicians found that their talents and thoughts could not be expressed through swing anymore.
The swing era really put a boundary on improvisation and the spontaneity, risk, and way to stretch out improvisationally for musicians. Not that this was a bad thing, but it was a reflection of the times, really. The swing era illuminated big bands and specific arrangements that featured the entire collective of musicians, in which the soloist would usually have a set section for a solo, most times was not even meant for stretching out, which means like taking a really long solo, like the guys did in the bebop era. Because it was more about adding to the big picture in the swing era of the arrangement. Not saying like this was a bad thing, and because it happened all the time, but it wasn't always the case, but it did happen most of the time. The swing era also put more focus on entertainment, commercial, and dance aspects of performing. The bebop era, however, helped to bring the soloist back into the limelight, where spontaneity, advanced intricate composition, virtuosic playing, and the freedom to really go for things and stretch the boundaries of art really happened in the bebop era. It was incredible. Charlie Parker articulates it really beautiful here by his quote on art in the sake of not having boundaries. Check it out. Now it's time to talk about the Great American Songbook. Songs such as Summertime, Someone to Watch Over Me, My Funny Valentine, Let's Face the Music and Dance, and Some Enchanted Evening are so familiar they seem to be part of America's cultural fabric. They are just 5 masterpieces in a canon now widely known as the Great American Songbook. It is not a real book, rather a term that applies to tunes of Broadway musical theater, Hollywood movie musicals, and Tin Pan Alley. This was the hub of songwriting that was the Music Publishers Row on New York's West 28th Street. The songs became the core repertoire of jazz musicians during this period, which stretched roughly from 1920 to 1960. So expanding on the Great American Songbook, jazz musicians would take these songs from that book and compose them in a jazz style, but more in a bebop style. More specifically, Charlie Parker would take, for instance, Stella by Starlight, which was a popular standard composed by Victor Young that was actually part of a 1944 movie, Paramount movie, called The Uninvited. He took that song and then added a bunch of different exotic chord changes, which allowed him to improvise more freely in a more kind of intricate and complex way, creating like a bebop sound over an American songbook standard, which was originally used for a movie and later adapted to a Broadway. So check it out here. You're going to see the original folio lead sheet of Stella by Starlight, and then you're going to actually hear how Bird adapted it with strings. Check it out.
Won't you play something?
It's about time you asked me that.
Go on.
Just a second.
You made that up?
Yes.
But you must be brilliant.
Oh, dazzling. People have to wear sunglasses.
What's it called?
It's a serenade. The Stella by Starlight.
You mean this Stella?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me.
Is it?
Please go on.
You see, this is the only way I can paint you. Some black keys and some white. And fingers that are much too clumsy. But you're in it somehow.
It's gone awfully sad. Why have you changed it?
Just came out that way. What's the matter? What is it, Stella? You're trembling.
Oh, I was wicked. How could I ever have laughed in her house?
But it's my house now. Pam's and mine.
But she was so young and she died so cruelly.
Stella!
So how cool was that, right? To hear Charlie Parker with strings, the adapted Stella by Starlight from the original movie Paramount, The Uninvited. Pretty cool thing that these beboppers were doing. So now we're going to go on to contrafacts, and I have my friends at learnjazzstandards.com that are going to help you kind of understand the concept behind contrafacts and how to get a grasp on it. It's a really cool idea. They explain it really well, so I'm going to hand it off to them. Check it
When
out.
I think about great jazz solos, I don't think about scales. I don't think about arpeggios. I don't think about any of that stuff. I think about really great melodies. The musicians that play really great melodies in their solos, those are the solos that I'm just like, wow, that was awesome. I want to emulate that as well. Not necessarily fast technique, crazy bebop lines. Great melodies, I think, are what makes great solos. And so if we want to be able to do that, I think we also need to be able to compose great melodies. Oftentimes jazz improvisation or improvisation in general is defined as composition sped up. So if we can't really compose great melodies, how do you think we can do that on the fly really fast? So let me first define what a contrafact is. A contrafact is a melody that is written over top of an existing song or chord changes, thus creating a new song altogether. Classic examples of this are like rhythm changes heads like Oleo or Anthropology. Those are all melodies which are written over the changes of Gershwin's I Got Rhythm. So the reason why contrafacts are helpful is because it takes an existing jazz standard form, a set of chord progressions that you probably already know, and instead of using the existing melody, you are going to compose your own. Whether you want to notate that down or just do it by ear, you're going to compose your own melody, the notes that you would want to hear come out. This is a slightly different mentality than, creating your own jazz solo, composing your own jazz solo. You really want to think about melodies, making them simple, memorable, and catchy. So to demonstrate an example, I'm going to take a contrafact, one of the contrafacts that I wrote in my book, The Jazz Standards Playbook. I'm going to play this one for you. This is over top of the jazz standards, It Could Happen to You. And this one I've cleverly called It Just Happened. So let me play that for you right now. So there's probably a couple things that you noticed in my contrafact. Number one is that there are reoccurring rhythmic and melodic themes throughout in the song. So I really come back to these melodic themes, and that's the same thing we should be doing in our jazz solos as well, not making it just a bunch of random ideas, but there's a theme to it and you're building off of that theme. And number two is I leave space. I'm not always just playing a flood of notes. A great melody needs space. Think about Miles Davis and all those great players like that. So I leave space in my composition.
So like Brett mentioned in jazzstandards.com, the video that just played, contrafacts are new melodies written over pre-existing chord changes. There are so many contrafacts out today that so many jazz musicians have written over pre-existing chord changes. Some of the most popular ones are just over a standard blues or a rhythm changes, kind of like the stock forms of jazz where they're kind of the testing ground for jazz musicians, rite of passage. You have to learn these in order to just flex and show your kind of like jazz muscle on the street, to be like a jazz gangster. But pretty much some of my favorite contrafacts are Confirmation, which was written by Charlie Parker, and John Coltrane wrote a contrafact over that. So he took the chord changes of Confirmation and wrote a whole new melody, and also added some tritone subs, which is like the Coltrane thing to do as passing chords, and it's called 26-2. And then, if it doesn't get more meta than this, Joe Lovano, the great tenor saxophonist, made a whole nother contrafact on top of the 26-2 that ties into Confirmation, and it takes elements of both of those two, and then he creates a whole new melody over that, which is called Bird's Eye View. So check it out here. We're going to listen to just a little bit of Confirmation. So that pretty much was the melody of Confirmation. Now we're going to listen to a little bit of 26-2. Now listen how John Coltrane adapts it a little bit. Now, even more amazing, check out how Joe Lovano takes both the elements of 26-2 and Confirmation and combines them with a fresh new melody on top. It's really amazing. Check it out. And that's pretty much Contrafacts in a nutshell. Hey everybody, so now we're going to check out a Charlie Parker lick that happens to be one of my favorite licks that he plays, and it's known as the Cool Blues lick. The really cool thing about this lick is that it's all diatonic. And what I mean by that, it's just a fancy word of saying that all of the notes in this lick are all part of the same scale. There's no fancy notes like a flat 9 or a sharp 4 in this. It's all notes that are part of the scale. In this case, the C major scale, concert pitch. The cool thing about this lick too is that it literally is a blues head. So you can literally repeat it 3 times and you already know a tune. So it's really flexible. And I guarantee you that after this video, you're going to start to hear it in a lot of people's playing. All these great jazz musicians quote Bird on the Cool Blues lick. So let's take a short listen here to the head of Cool Blues. Let's try breaking down this lick, the Cool Blues lick. So like how I mentioned before, all the notes are basically all part of the C major scale. It's beautiful. It's basically a triad, 1, 3, 5, and they're just kind of jumbled up to create this really beautiful bebop lick. So you start on the 5 in C. If you play a triad in concert C, 1, 3, 5. So you start on the 5th, do, mi, so, and then you go down to the 3rd. So you start on the 5th, and then you jump down to the 3rd. It's almost like starting with a triad, but from the top down. So, mi. And then you have like a little enclosure, which leads you to the 5 again. And then you jump back up to the 1, or in this case, you can say 1 or the 8, kind of same thing. And then you come down by step, down the scale. Literally step by step down the scale. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. you go down a third, a minor third, and then you drop down to an A, jump all the way back to the third, and then 5, 2, so re. So if you break it down, it's a lot. It's beautiful because it's basically going. It's all surrounded by a triad, and it sounds so good. So let's try breaking it down slowly, or playing it together slowly. Here we go. And I like to add like a little lower neighbor kind of thing at the end. I've heard Bird do it before. Going down to the root and then coming back up to the a scale degree 2. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, the cool blues lick. And what's really beautiful about the cool blues lick too, if you want to jump into some jazz theory, is over the chords, it fits over a turnaround. In jazz, we have little turnarounds, and basically, in a nutshell, a turnaround is just a chord progression that has lots of forward-moving harmonic kind of movement, momentum, and it's a fancy way of trying to get back to the tonic. So in this case, you have your E minor 7, you have your A7, your D minor 7, your G7, 2 tonic. So it's pretty much a 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 turnaround. And it's really cool. This turnaround exists in the last bar of the A section of Yardbird Suite. So yeah, check it out. Thank you so much for tuning in. And this has been the Charlie Parker Journey Part 2. Thank you guys so much, and good luck. Spread the good word of Bird, and I look forward to hearing you on the bandstand sometime.